Du lyssnar till PalestinaPodden, avsnitt 12. Det är inte längre ockupation, det är apartheid. Där Johanna Wallin från Palestinagrupperna i Sverige träffar Roy Yellin från den israeliska människorättsorganisationen berättar.
Det här avsnittet av PalestinaPodden spelas in på Bokmässan i Göteborg. Idag har vi med oss Roy Yellin som kommer från berättar som är en av Israels största människorättsorganisationer. Welcome to PalestinaPodden, the Palestine podcast, Roy.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you. So you are here at the book fair in Gothenburg to speak about the work of berättar. Can you tell us a bit about your organization?
Yes, berättar was founded over 30 years ago during the days of the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation, by Jewish Israelis, activists, academics, researchers, parliamentarians, and journalists that thought that if the Israeli public will receive credible information about violations of human rights, they will act to stop them. And since then, the organization has been documenting, monitoring, publishing about the different types of violations. We are not a legal organization. We are more of an information center. We also write reports. And the other big project that we do is we hand out cameras, sort of a citizen journalism project. So we give Palestinians cameras and they document their daily lives and a lot of other violations that they witness. We, of course, collect the data, research it, and send it to the media and to the world.
Right. And you said that the hope was that information about what's going on, it will be enough to change the situation.
So yes, back in 1989, that was the theory of change. Today it sounds a little bit naive, but it was actually kind of successful back then. Unfortunately, the political situation and the years and also, generations of Israelis that were born into this kind of protracted occupation that also in itself shifted and changed, made this theory of change a little bit irrelevant. So we also changed that, of course. We don't believe that information is enough. We believe that information is necessary, but it's a necessary precondition, but not enough in order to bring about change. And we also think that Israelis will act only if there's outside pressure that will incentivize them to act. So this also has, our perspective on that has changed, and we adjusted as years went by.
Do you have more of a focus on the international community now as opposed to the Israeli general public, or is it both?
I think we increased our capacity. Actually, if I look just like at numbers, berättar has been the organization that invests the most in outreach to the Israeli public. And I mean really like looking at the budget of our colleagues, even ones that are focusing solely on human rights issues or environmental issues only within Israel, we spend the most. We raise a lot of money to make sure that our information reaches each and every Israeli that is willing to look at it or get it, including like PR, media, campaigns, even distributing, printing hundreds of thousands of copies of reports and sending them out. But we also developed more of a know-how and attention to work with the international media and the international community. You either do that or do that. You can do both, and it actually feeds into each other, because today with social media and the fact that everybody has access to everything that happens around, you kind of live in a glass house. You can't pretend like there's the difference between what you're doing locally to what you're doing globally. You're doing everything, and everything is public. So we're trying to actually use this situation and use the local to amplify our global outreach, and to use our global outreach in order to extend our influence at home.
I think, or at least it's my impression, that the Israeli peace movement, anti-occupation movement, what you want to call it, is not very well known in Sweden. So it would be really interesting if you could give us a sort of an update on the situation today inside Israel when it comes to people and organizations who are involved in peace in one way or another.
I will divide it into two categories. I think that there's a sort of like old guard of organization and perhaps even like political players that promoted things back in the 80s and 90s when the Israeli peace movement was rather strong and even reached electoral successes and briefly held the government. And there is more of a grassroots movements that are now growing and changing the landscape, but also their political view of what happens and their political understanding. But those movements are still not holding positions of power. So I think like the old guard is sort of waning in a way. And this is no news to anyone who looks at the Israeli elections. We know that the Israeli Labour Party merits are really like barely existing. We don't expect that to change in the coming elections. We're going to have another elections in the beginning of November. It's not likely that this phoenix is going to rise out of the ashes. There is a lot of grassroots activities with new organizations that were formed, like Omdim Beyachad, like Combatants for Peace, and also NGOs that are more focused on direct action in Palestine, like Ta'ayosh.
Yes.
They're not really an organization, they're just like activists that are really using their privileges as Jews in order to protect Palestinian farmers or people in communities that face expulsion. And this is like something which is very, very different and shifting the landscape of political action, because today, with social networks, it also creates a lot of exposure to daily lives in a way that political movements in the past really didn't look. I think for us, at least, as a human rights organization, it's a huge shift and a huge help, because the entire premise of the political process in the past was that, yes, there are a lot of violations of human rights, but they will be resolved in the future. And the focus on what happens on daily basis on the ground is really shifting people's perspective to the understanding that we need to address the violations that happen now and not, again, like bank on a future that never arrives.
Exactly. And the work that you do and the work that also other human rights organizations do, what would you say is the general view in Israel?
Some like us, some support us, and most don't. I think that the environment in general in Israel has become very, very hostile to human rights work, to human rights organization. Even just calling somebody a leftist has become sort of like a bad word. We had Trump before Trump came into power. Benjamin Netanyahu was a precursor of right-wing populism before it became, sadly, became a global phenomena. So delegitimizing human rights activists and organizations, portraying them as traitors, this has really become the mainstream of Israeli media and political discourse. What's worse is that Israel has now also openly attacks in a much more flagrant way Palestinian civil society. And we just have to assume that what happens there will eventually reach us, and it's just a matter of time before we are also declared as undesirable.
I read somewhere that you said that Israel is not a democracy that temporarily occupies another territory. Is that a new conclusion for you?
It is not a new conclusion to us, because the occupation itself is not temporary. We're now nearing the 56th year of the occupation. So there are like 4, even 5th generation of Palestinians that were born to life of subjugation without freedom, of no civil rights, even basic things like freedom of expression, even the right to dissent against the situation is deprived of them. And for us as an organization, for many years, we used different types of euphemism to describe the situation. We said that it's a prolonged occupation, illegal, long occupation, intemporary occupation, one-state reality. But eventually, as the Israeli government became more bold with declaring that it has no intention of ever changing this situation, we thought that we have to also look for a better description and a better diagnosis of this problem. And therefore, we looked into it and we concluded that, in fact, what it is no longer occupation, but rather a regime of apartheid.
And this is also one of the reasons that you are here at the book fair, is to talk about the term of apartheid in regards to Israel. And what you are saying in this position paper that you published called "This is Apartheid" is that apartheid is not only relevant when it comes to the West Bank, the occupied territory, but also to Israel proper.
Yes. I think the most important conclusion that we reached is that the assumption that there are two parallel and separate regimes at play is divorced from reality. This kind of make-believe, pretend that Israel is a permanent democracy and that enjoys all the perks of being a Western democracy, an association agreement with the EU, close ties with the US. And on the side, it has a military dictatorship that for 55 years controls Palestinians. Over the years, things have changed. 700,000 Jews are living in the occupied territories, enjoying a different legal system, enjoying all the benefits of the Israeli social services. They vote in elections, while a few meters from them, you have Palestinians that are not even connected to the water and electricity grid.
I think we should stop there and explain a little bit that we are now talking about the settlements inside of the West Bank. This is something that we hear quite a lot about in Sweden. And in fact, just the mere fact that there are settlements in the West Bank is illegal according to international law. And as you said, these Israeli citizens who are living in the settlements are enjoying privileges that the Palestinians are not, but also they fall under a different legal system altogether. Yes. Maybe you could explain that a bit.
Yes, but I want to, before that, just to get back to why we think that it's that we can't make this distinction between two regimes. On one hand, you have Israelis that are living there. But on the other hand, there's only one government that controls the area. There's the Israeli army is getting its marching order from the Israeli government. The settlements are enjoying the Israeli services like the finance, the health services, everything that the state provides. It provides to them the electricity, water, infrastructure, everything, roads, everything that the state is doing for the benefit of the settlers. And when we started to look at the situation, we also had to kind of extend our mandate and look also inside Israel. And we knew, of course, that there is institutionalized discrimination of Palestinians in Israel. But our conclusion of apartheid also stemmed from the fact that the separation is done between different types of Palestinians. So it's not separation between Jews and Palestinians. Israel is separating Palestinians from other Palestinians, demographically and politically engineering the space it controls to allow for Jews to have the upper hand and to maintain their control over Palestinians. And therefore, we reached the conclusion that it's apartheid because it's one regime and it discriminates Palestinians no matter where they live, even within Israel proper.
And what would be your answer to those who claim that the term apartheid is only relevant in the South African case?
Those people that claim that are people that are trying to shield Israel from consequences to its policy. However, the international community thought that the term apartheid is relevant. Therefore, it's included in international treatises. It's defined in international criminal law. And something that is defined is not defined there as a historical test case. It's defined there in order to prevent those types of regime from ever repeating themselves and perpetrating the same wrongs to other people.
The view of Israel as not being a democracy is very far from how Western governments describe Israel and also treat Israel. Can you comment on that?
I think that politicians all over the world like the status quo. It serves them well. And therefore, pushing them to recognize reality is something that they try to avoid. The pushback that we've encountered against the use of the word apartheid stems exactly from that reason. I think those politicians know what happens, but they don't want to draw the necessary conclusions. So if we don't name the thing, we also don't have to reach the necessary conclusions that come with this certain term. And therefore we have this like pushbacks and resistance to the shift. However, I have to stress, we're not just like a crazy organization. We're not single. Palestinian organizations have been making this assessment for years. And unfortunately, because of the division of power, they were not heard and they were not paid attention enough. But following, shortly after we published, also two of the largest human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, published extensive research that reached the same conclusion. So I think right now we're in a very, very different place. There's a consensus in the human rights community. Yes. There's also a consensus among scholars that, in fact, what the Israeli regime is an apartheid regime. The political class is kind of lagging on in recognizing this reality, but we understand the reasons behind that.
Could you explain just in brief, apartheid is defined as a crime against humanity, but what does it mean in practice?
So just in a nutshell, the definition is a regime in which one group is dominating another group by means of violence, laws, and practices. For it to constitute an apartheid, we need persecution, we need systemic violence, we need it to be anchored in the legal system, and we need one group to do it to another group. It's usually like in the common imagination, because of the reference to South Africa, we think about black people and white people, but in fact, like it's racialized group. Race is a social construct. It's not something that is, really exists in reality. And the understanding is that the othering process of a society defines what is us and what is them, and it wants to control the them. Is the way that we define what race is, or what are the way by which we discriminate another. On the daily basis, apartheid comes into play on really like the very, very basic level of who gets to vote, who gets civil rights, who is able to move freely from a place to place, travel abroad, who can build a house and where, who can express their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with this situation. So really, like every aspect of life is really, we need the state in order to realize our human rights. And when the state is against you, you're living life exposed without any sort of protection, and a lot of time exposed to violence. And the violence of the state, of course, is like the most severe form of violence because the state has more power than non-state actors.
What has been the reactions to your position paper, both inside Israel and abroad?
Within Israel, we were very scared before we published because we didn't know how it's going to be accepted. But even to our slight surprise, a month after we published, we conducted the public opinion survey to see what Palestinians and Israelis think about apartheid, the definition, and whether it fits what they experience in as the type of regime that they live under. So I think it's like not surprise to anyone that 75% of the Palestinians thought that the definition of apartheid fits the regime as they know it. But it will surprise a lot of people to hear that 25% of Jewish Israelis thought that this description of the regime fits what they know and see. So it was much higher than we thought. We thought that it would take us several years to get that far. And in terms of globally, it was covered widely on the international media. But we thought that this coverage, okay, people covered our report, that's enough, that it will take a lot of time. But then Israel sort of said to all of us, hold my beer, and attacked Gaza and did a lot of other things within Israel proper, with police violence and army violence to a degree that was really like staggering. And suddenly the international community, even in places where it was a tough sell, like the United States, had the narrative to understand what they're watching on television. And a lot of people said, yes, it is apartheid. This is how apartheid looks like. And I think like more than anything than we could say or try to explain, reality is revealing more than anything.
For us, it's been quite interesting because we have obviously worked to spread the word about your position paper, also Amnesty's report and Human Rights Watch, to the political establishment in Sweden. And mainly what we've been met with is silence. In the cases that we have had reactions, it's been along the lines of, well, we don't agree with their conclusions, or that's not a term that we use. And that has been the end of it. And that was quite surprising to us that that was the main reaction, because it's not as if they are kind of providing us with any counter evidence to support their case. But why do you think that in this particular term is so sensitive to the political establishment?
It's a touchy subject, and I think Israel apologists have been super successful in trying to make it politically undesirable to face reality. So, of course, like on the substance level, there's no arguments that will prove that what we're saying is not right. And I have to admit that it was like also difficult for us to use the term. I think it took us some years to really like to feel brave and secure enough in our analysis to use it. So I don't expect other people to see it for the first time and to adopt it immediately. I think that's maybe even before I get to the answer about politicians. The first component is we need to give it a little bit of time. But the second, and I think more important issue, is the fact that if you use it, you have to change your policy entirely. And that's not something that politicians are likely to do. They're definitely not likely to do it on the spot, and they're definitely not likely to do it without demand from their constituency. And I think this is on us, on not just us as B'Tselem, but I'm talking about the bigger global us as human rights community, as people of the citizens of the world that care about justice, to make it like a demand that is profitable politically to answer. And when this happens, I think they will tread along. I think that they're looking behind and they don't see enough numbers to do it. But once they understand that the public is with them, they'll get their marching orders from us.
And also we were discussing this earlier, that it also in South Africa, now looking back in history, it looks as if it was a a very brief and very successful struggle, but obviously it was not. It took many, many decades, and it was at a very high price.
Yeah, I think this is like a lot of things about struggles about human rights. It seems like a nice story. You read about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and suffragists and heroes of the LGBTQ community, and it seems like they had a nice life, but actually it took decades and a lot of victims also. I mean, some people bled or sat in jail. We have to remember, especially in the context of South Africa, that it took many, 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 many decades that the US reversed its position on concrete sanctions against South Africa only at the end of the 80s. It was 1989 when the United States joined the wagon of the global call to end apartheid. So we really have, and the apartheid regime, just for somebody who doesn't know that, it was cemented in the mid-40s, 1945. So it took a rather long time, almost 50 years, to end this injustice.
Was it painful also for you personally to realize that the situation in Israel has gone so far as to become a reality of apartheid?
Yeah, it's unpleasant. I think like the best analogy I can think about it is like, I mean, what we do, we first collect the facts, and then we have to look at the facts, and then we have to make an analysis, like a diagnosis of the fact. So we felt like we're a doctor that needs to tell somebody he has cancer. It's like terminal illness. It's really like apartheid is one of the worst crimes that the state can commit. It's a crime against humanity. And it's not like nice to tell people that they have cancer, but a good, correct diagnosis can also help them get better. And as difficult as it was, and also like thinking about maybe the consequences for us as an organization, I think it's necessary because people built this terrible regime and we can change it and it can become better. But if we don't name it, we can't do anything about it. So naming and shaming is part of the game of an organization such as mine. And we did what we had to do. When we started talking, we talked about our theory of change. I think as far as my experience, that even in Sweden, we're still missing like the information part is missing. I had many meetings and a lot of them were super good and helpful. But in a lot of them, my sense was that people did not know enough about the facts that led us to reach the conclusion that we reached, and that the information part is still necessary to a large degree. People know in general about what happens, but they don't know the extent of what happens, and they don't know the political and legislative aspect of it. So they think that, yes, there's like a conflict between two sides, but they don't understand that, first of all, the asymmetry between the two sides, and second, they don't understand the legal construct that accompanies that. The impunity that Israel has enacted for its military echelon, the complete like disregard for international law, but also the fact that now the discrimination of Palestinians is enshrined in Israeli basic law. It's like a constitutional principle that courts are supposed to interpret other laws according to this principle. So the cards are now flashed, they're on the table. Before we didn't have a smoking gun to talk about what the Israeli intentions are, but now it's out there. You can't deny them. And if Israel wants to defend itself from what they term the allegation of apartheid, it can transform the regime. It can stop discrimination. It can realize the human rights and political and civil rights of Palestinians, and then nobody will make any claim. But this is not on us. This is on the Israeli regime.
as part of the global community, what would you say is our main task here in Sweden as part of civil society?
I don't think that I can tell what is the main part, but I think my sense after being here is that a lot of the background for this decision is unknown to people. Mm-hmm. They think that there's a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and maybe they even understand that there is asymmetry of power, that Israel is controlling Palestinians, not because they're a security threat, but it's actually because they're weak and we can take their lands and enjoy all the resources that they have without paying an international or security price for that. And people should also understand the legal framework under which everything happens. In the past, things were kind of vague, but in recent years, Israel has made its intentions very explicit. It says openly, Israeli officials are saying that they have no intentions of stopping the control of Palestinians, of ever giving them free, independent sovereignty, and realizing their political and civil rights. On the contrary, Israeli legislated basic law, Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, which enshrines the discrimination of Palestinians and relegates them to be second-class citizens, and it became a constitutional rule in Israel. So courts are now supposed to interpret other laws in light of this law, and discrimination is now part of the Israeli legal system, and it's out in the open. So the smoking gun regarding the Israeli intention is out there for everyone to see, but somehow people are not aware of it.
Part of your privilege, let's say, as an Israeli organization is also that you have the ability to reach the international community in a way that maybe Palestinians don't always do. And you also legitimize in a way what they are saying and what they have been saying for quite a long time. How do you see your role in that respect?
I think it's very clear that the purpose of having an Israeli human rights organization saying those things stems from two reasons. One is because it's our responsibility. We are the perpetrators of those violations. And as a Jewish man living in Israel, I feel that we should do something to change that. But the second is that just by the sheer fact of our identity as Jewish, we get a different and sometimes unfair ear when it comes to those issues, because it's very, very difficult to manipulatively weaponize anti-Semitism against us, and it's very easy to do it when it comes to other people. So when we're saying things, it has to be judged on the merit and the content. And when other people are saying it, when Palestinians are saying the same things, sometimes it's easier to take it off the table with false allegations. Mm-hmm. I think that in regards to what you said about the pushback against the apartheid and using the word, I think I said that in Israel it's used on really like every day on the media. You can read about it, and Jewish supremacy is something that is widely used. And I think, yes, that it's sort of a phenomena where something which is so widely discussed within Israel is a no-go outside of it. But, part of trying to work for human rights is not doing just what is easy, but sometimes taking upon yourself also the hard task of explaining to people why they should be using something and why they should be paying some price, and why they should use words that are uncomfortable and make other people uncomfortable, because the situation should make you uncomfortable. like if we want to change it, we should make people move in their chairs and not accept it. So if people use it and are willing also to educate themselves, so they have strong arguments and can support themselves and can explain to others what they're saying is actually based on research and facts and truth, they will be doing something which will really improve the world. So it's really like you can't do that on a lot of things, but sometimes even like on social media, you can do something which will help others. And if you have this opportunity, I hope people take it.
That's very encouraging for us as well in our work. And we really heavily rely on you and other organizations and the amazing work that you do. Thank you for talking to us today, Roy Yellin from B'Tselem.
Thank you.
Du har lyssnat till PalestinaPodden med Johanna Wallin och Roy Yellin. PalestinaPodden produceras av Palestinagrupperna i Sverige. För tekniken svarade Per Skytt. Musik Akram Abdel Fattah och Per Skytt. På återhörande.